Hey everybody, this is Matthew Soltesiak, and you're listening to Not the Same Old Lions podcast, part of the Minute Media Podcast Network. This season, it's all grit. I speak with a variety of guests and interview key players, gaining more insight on what makes this team go. The Detroit Lions are now in a new, grittier era, and we look beyond just the kneecaps when it comes to the analysis. Welcome to another episode. In this episode, we preview the Detroit Lions Week 17 matchup with the San Francisco 49ers, a rematch from the NFC Championship game last year. We'll talk about what we expect out of this game, including some possible adjustments and potential implications, win or lose. We'll also wrap up some thoughts from last game and hit on any major storylines, that and more. Let's get to it, Lions fans.
This is Jameer Gibbs, and you listen to Not the Same Old Lions podcast.
Joining me today is Coach Jerry Angers, the former Michigan High School Coach of the Year, as well as Coach of the Week by the Detroit Lions. He's the current scouting and training director for Bull Rush Sports. Coach, happy to have you here.
Happy to be here. Merry Christmas. Happy New Year.
Merry Christmas. Happy New Year. As we record this, it's also Hanukkah, and I believe Boxing Day as well, so there's a lot of celebrations going on. Joining us with these celebrations is James Cook, the senior sports writer for the Traverse City Record Eagle. You can also hear him on the Get Around podcast. That drops on Mondays. James, good to have you joining us.
Good to be here as always. I'll say happy holidays to encompass everybody and Merry Christmas and all that. And hopefully the Lions get a nice gift this week.
Yes, we've got a lot to look forward to. I know there were a couple football games on Christmas Day. As enticing as the matchup seemed, they were AFC, so they were lower on my interest radar. Games didn't turn out to be that great. But we got to get ready for a big game this week. Before we do that, let's wrap up some final thoughts from the last game against the Bears. This first one, I want Coach to weigh in on this. Talk about the secondary, okay? The Lions secondary had a very different look last week. And one of the guys you brought up right away was Ifeatu Melifonwu. If he contributed right away in that game, Branch got moved into the nickel position, which is kind of like, where he played last year. And last year they talked about him wanting to have that flexibility, that versatility in his rookie year, but didn't want to put too much on his plate, they quickly realized. And so it didn't really happen. But this position versatility, you could keep Branch on the field in nickel situations and have Iffy there. And then when they go to, a standard, 4-3 look, you could move him back to the safety position and keep him on all the time, Coach. And so I think that's going to be a new wrinkle. And Amik Robertson, the free agent signing this offseason, moving to the outside, those are some big moves. And those are some moves that I think keep the ship steadied throughout all these changes, Coach. I know you looked at the film after the game. What are some of your analysis and thoughts on this?
Well, the basic integral parts, you got all these different parts that you can put together. You got Iffy, who played a ton last year, Branch, who's already had a full season under his belt playing down in the box. And then you take Robertson, who just had a phenomenal game. I mean, they were really excited about how well he played out there, into that corner position. He's been playing that slot corner. Here's the thing to think about with him. When you play that slot corner, there's a two-way go for the guy you're covering. He could go inside, he could go outside. When you're playing that outside corner, yeah, there is a two-way go. You can come inside or you can go outside, but the distance on the outside route is really, really small and narrow because there's a thing called the sidelines over there. And so I think that fit into what Robertson does. He's a little mighty mite or whatever you want to call him. He's not a big guy, but the tackles between those three in the box, with Branch, I don't remember the exact numbers, but all three of those guys are hitters. And I think, it's really, I think it's made our defense better just in 1 week, and of course getting the guys back too. But now because you have Robertson's been there all year, he can play outside. And then you got Branch and Iffy, who are basically playing the positions they started at last year with something under their belt, more practice.
Well, and that comes right back to the depth we've talked about going into this season. So when you have to pull somebody in, it's not someone who has no experience. You've got guys with multiple years of NFL experience with Amik Robertson and Ifeatu Melifonwu coming in. Those guys weren't starting, on the outside or in the safety position 3 weeks ago, and they're filling in and playing crucial roles, James. And that's going to be important down the stretch here.
Yeah, I think so. If you look at the snap counts, Melifonwu played 80% of the snaps last week in his first game back.
Wow.
The coaches on both sides kind of condensed the snap counts, I think, a little bit more on more players, especially in the linebacker core and on offense. But Melifonwu played a ton, and you saw some guys, who only played on special teams like David Long. They let him go after the game, but a Long, Mosley, Vildor, Strickland, Nice, Awashika, the guys only played special teams, and some of those guys were ones who were getting some some decent amount of snaps, especially Long and Vildor.
Yeah, well, and you just mentioned the name Awashika, right? I mean, that's a guy we thought might actually see time on the offensive line with the injury to Graham Glasgow, but instead the Lions went a different direction with Christian Mahogany. And it was a pretty great showing at left guard for him. Graham's expected to be back, but encouraging to see this performance because we had high expectations for Mahogany, especially for a 6th-round draft pick. If you remember, a lot of people thought he'd be a 2nd or 3rd-round pick, and he fell so late, Coach. Getting this practice, and I mean, maybe Awashika is the guy that, is ahead of him potentially as far as the depth chart goes, but there's a reason they wanted him in that game. They wanted him to get that experience, Coach. How crucial is that, knowing that, hey, he might have to spell some snaps later in the regular season or in the postseason?
Oh, for sure. I mean, you got him, he missed preseason. That hurt him,
Yeah.
we knew with him coming in how good he was going to be, just from his college tape, and I think he had some injuries and stuff, and that's why he fell so far. But now you basically have two guards that can back up either spot. And I think Mahogany's a right guard, to be honest with you. And he came in and played pretty well at left guard. So it's a great position for us to be in. And again, the Lions are always working on things. Maybe Arwashika is better than Mahogany, but they said we can use him right now. We can get him in this game. Now we have reps, we have film. The eye in the sky don't lie, and this is just huge for our depth all the way around.
That it is. And James, I mean, again, I saw a headline that said, "Who is Brad Holmes' biggest bust?" Okay. I think that right there, Brad Holmes' bust might be like an oxymoron, right? Like jumbo shrimp, because if Brad Holmes is making the pick, it doesn't seem to be the case. But again, if you're drafting somebody late, it doesn't even matter. But it should be, who's Brad Holmes' best draft pick? That's the question you should be asking. So he's made so many. You're trying to figure out who's the best. And we're not even going down that road right now, but Christian Mahogany is potentially another example of getting somebody late at a value, right? Because we talked about that before, the value he goes for. He goes for these guys, regardless of their position, who might be the most valuable. And so James getting those returns, and then the offensive line coming back together. That was a good bounce back game for the Lions offensive line.
Yeah, it was, especially Frank Ragnow. The week before he had a bit of a rough game, some penalties, some, just not normal Frank Ragnow play. And he bounced back in that last game and played really, really well. I think a lot of the headlines went to Mahogany because he's the new shiny toy. But Ragnow really had a nice game there. And they played the entire line, 100% of the snaps the whole game. But with Glasgow coming back, maybe sitting out a game is good for him. It kind of was for Decker a couple weeks ago, and we've seen him since sitting a game and getting kind of right that he's played better in those couple of games since. So maybe they get the same thing out of Graham Glasgow when he comes back.
At Kroger Pharmacy, care is what's most convenient for you. Care is being here when you need us. We're open evenings and weekends. Care is helping you save more. Most insurance plans and discount cards are accepted at your local Kroger Pharmacy. Care is saving you time by managing your prescriptions online. You can request refills, check order status, and more. Care is convenience that works for everyone. Kroger Health, a world of care is in store. Services and availability vary by location. Age and other restrictions may apply. For coverage, consult your health insurance company. Visit the pharmacy or our site for details.
Yeah, and again, this time of year, just having a little bit of rest for somebody too isn't the worst thing in the world, because, the Lions bye week was pretty early this year. Wasn't it like week 5? So that break does help. Another great thing we saw was some creativity, another trick play. And this one, again, was specific to the Bears, because people keep saying, well, why are the Lions doing all these? Because now you can't use them later. Well, this one was specifically geared towards the Bears. I mean, James, they told the story afterwards that they had scouted the Packers on this, or they scouted old film and saw this against the Packers. So it wasn't just like, hey, let's create something that we could use against anybody. It was against this team.
Yeah, it was pretty specific. I mean, because earlier in the season, the Packers would run a play where I think Jordan Love turned to hand the ball off to the running back. They hit each other. The running back falls down. Love fumbles the ball and then picks it up, turns around and sees a tight end wide open, and hits, I think it was Luke Musgrave for a pretty big gain against the Bears earlier this season. So the Lions just did the same thing without actually dropping the ball. I mean, it's kind of earlier in the week, Ben Johnson was asked about maybe the Bears opening, and he said the politically correct things, about the Bears and saying, oh, it's a nice opportunity and, it's interesting and all that kind of stuff. And then he rolls out that play against them and just humiliates them. It was just great. I mean, I've seen people just referring to Ben Johnson, we've all heard the mad scientist, kind of comparisons and everything like that. But the other term I've been seeing people use about him is sicko. That he's just a sicko, and is just looking to humiliate people.
Yeah, I'm going to go in a different direction. And again, please take this comparison extremely loose. But when I see what Ben Johnson is doing, sometimes, I'm going to take a Sherlock Holmes quote and say it's elementary, dear Watson, or however you say that. When I was in elementary school, I don't know what you guys did during your free time, but I would draw football plays on my scratch paper, okay? And I would draw all these different things up. And sometimes I think I maybe missed my calling in life, Coach, and I didn't go down that path and become an offensive coordinator because I was always drawing these crazy plays up. And it's like, Ben Johnson found all my notes in the garbage can and has used them all. Now, again, Ben Johnson, much smarter at this than I am. I didn't get past the 4th grade level, okay? But sometimes they say, folks, you want creativity, ask a child, because they are the ones that have the creative brains, right? Because their possibilities are much more endless because they're not constrained by certain realities that adults come to know. And so I almost think he continues to tap in to that elementary brain he has. And Coach, I don't know if you heard this, but I think Jared Goff was saying they actually had that play called the play before, but they didn't get the look they wanted, so they checked out of it, and then they did it again. And that right there, Coach, is another element to the genius, I think, of this offense, is they'll call the same call 2 in a row, but they can audible out of it if they don't get the right look and go right back to it, Coach. And so how great is that?
Well, that's awesome. I mean, anytime you can check the line, you got a guy as smart as Jared Goff, who's basically Ben Johnson's clone. And, we as coaches have always said, it's not about the X's and O's, about the Jimmy and the Joes. And anytime you have a Jimmy and a Joe on the field, that's like a coach, they make you look good. And, we're not out there, as coaches. And I think those are just a huge thing and again, they designed that for that specific reason. And again, why did we waste it? Well, it probably would not work at somebody else's defense. People got to understand it. And the other thing too is now you're a linebacker in a game. I'm going to go back to the game. Now you're in a linebacker in a game and we fumble a ball down the road. What is that linebacker going to do? Is he going to immediately come downhill, or is he going to, in the back of his mind, go, man, I've been watching this crazy sicko play that Ben Johnson put in against the Bears, and it's gonna delay them a little bit. So, I think Madden has a lot to do with you guys. Kids, they're playing Madden when they're younger, and people are designing all these goofy plays. And hell, hey, if it works on Madden, it's got to work in real life, right?
Yeah, I mean, I took the Tecmo Bowl stuff. I remember the Tecmo Bowl. That was my inspiration. Tecmo Bowl, Tecmo Super Bowl on Nintendo, and then on to Super NES. And then Madden took it to a whole different level.
There you go.
All right, well, I guess it's time to turn our attention to this week's game. And to do that, let's start hearing from Coach Campbell.
It's easy for everybody. That way all the critics can jump out and start attacking. But that way you don't have to debate them anymore. We're bringing everything we got to this game, and we are playing, and I don't care what it looks like and where it's at or who's this, who's that. We're going out to play and win this game out on the West Coast.
Okay, guys, I mean, that's it right now. We're going to get into that stuff later in this episode about will this game matter or not matter as far as positioning go and whatnot. But we know the Lions are going to give the 49ers everything they got in this game to win because, A, Coach Campbell said that's what they're going to do, and B, this is the rematch from last year. Now, Coach Campbell talked earlier today, Coach, and he said the Lions are more mature than last year. He admitted they did some things wrong. Now, that doesn't mean they shouldn't have gone for it on fourth down or something like that, but maybe they missed a block or they didn't do something here or there. And he said San Francisco did some things right. Coach Campbell also talked about how every rep matters, and this is something I think you can explain well. He goes, even in the second quarter, you've got to be ready for that rep because it could be that important later in the game. And he goes, they're also more prepared now than a year ago, and he thinks that experience will serve them well. And so just speaking to that right there, how do you think the Lions are envisioning the 49ers in this matchup?
Well, again, you get the revenge tour, whatever you want to call it, each week, each game. We've kind of gone through that this year as the games that they played. And we got a lot of rookies right now that were rookies last year that are second-year players right now that are playing at all-pro level. And you take all of a sudden you got these young guys, the Branches and the Gibbses and stuff like that as rookies, and they're in a game. They're a one half away from going to the Super Bowl, and they went in. And I remember hearing some of the guys going in at halftime, "We're going to the Super Bowl." Dude, you're in San Francisco. You got a whole nother half to play, and so every rep counts, every matter counts, and I think they'll take that. The experience from last year, and they'll carry that over, and I think that's one of the biggest things is Gibbs had a fumble, correct?
He did.
We had a ball bounce off a face mask, correct? That's not the same. That was the old Lion stuff that used to happen with us all the time. And I think they're going to, they'll use that. And they've been thinking about it for almost 365 days, probably 300, 295 days, whatever. They've been thinking about that. It's been bothering them. It's, and as a coach and as a player, that when you lose something like that, that just festers and just sits on your mind the whole time. And I think the experience, I think what they experienced at the game, what they experienced through the season, what they've learned through practices, they know that it's one rep and done. What was Coach Campbell's famous quote, you guys, after that game? "It's awful hard to get back here, guys." He wasn't saying they couldn't. He was just saying it's awful hard. And I think that's what this whole season encompasses with all the injuries and everything, is they've put that in there, and they're not going to let it happen no matter who's next to them or in front of them or behind them.
And that's so appropriate. It's almost like Dan Campbell knew the message his team needed to hear before the season, because it hasn't been easy. It has been harder for a different reason than expected, perhaps, but it's still there. Now, San Francisco is banged up like Detroit, and it does show in their record there, James. But I'm still expecting the Lions to give us everything they have based on everything we heard Coach Campbell say. And the other thing that should not be mistaken here, even though their record might not be stellar at this point, they're a significantly better team, especially coached team, than the Chicago Bears. So this will not be an easy game on the road there, James. What are some of your thoughts on the things Coach and I have brought up?
Yeah, well, the Lions and 49ers have both faced a lot of adversity this season with a slew of injuries on both sides. The Lions have been able to overcome theirs. The 49ers haven't. They've kind of showed that on the field. Their injuries at wide receiver, to their offensive line, to Christian McCaffrey, and almost every other running back that they've had in the field. Their injuries have mostly been on the offense, whereas the Lions were on the defense. So it's not an exact parallel line, but I don't see that Kyle Shanahan is going to play dead in this game. This is a revenge game for the Lions, and with the kind of preposterous talk that the 49ers are somehow considering getting rid of Kyle Shanahan, which I think is just ridiculous. Shanahan is not going to come out and play dead in this game. They don't consider the season over, even though they're out of the playoffs. they're just playing for draft position kind of at this point. But this is a revenge game for Detroit. Dan Campbell made these players for the Lions watch this game over and over again during the offseason to motivate them, to remind them how close they were to the Super Bowl, like Jerry said. Even if people say that this game doesn't matter, look at the last time the Lions maybe played a game that didn't matter, which 2 years ago in Green Bay at the end of the season. The Lions, that game didn't matter to them. They came out, threw everything they had there, won that game. And I think that was a big win in propelling to the Lions to where they are now.
Yeah, attitude, effort, and all those things are things that Coach has talked about, and I've seen Coach, speak about to his players, and that is something that can carry you. That's that invisible force, right? That's that thing you can't always measure, and that's like the heart and the determination. Well, let's look at this 49er offense, Coach. I know you broke down a big scouting report. San Francisco is 8th in total yards, 7th in passing, and maybe surprisingly to some, they are 11th in rushing, even though they're on their 3rd or 4th string running back at this point. They're 15th in points scored. That's just more than 10 points fewer than the Lions, though. So what are you expecting out of the San Francisco offense when the Lions face them on Monday Night Football?
Well, I think, again, there's players over there. James alluded to it. You've alluded to it. And Shanahan's a great coach. And what better way to put another the candle on the cake, or whatever you want to call it, to where they come out and play a great football game and knock off the Lions again, on the road. I mean, those are things that you have to worry about. Brock Purdy's, again, he's a system quarterback. I think everybody said, well, we've seen what the system quarterback does. He runs the system pretty well then. So those are things, I go back to the game last year, even though our second half was really, we just every mistake you can think of. But, let's talk about Brock Purdy. Last year he averaged 2.8 rushes per game. Okay, 2.8. So in a game, he had 2.8, almost 3, and he averaged 4.1 average in that season. 4.1 in those carries. All right. Last year in the playoff game against us, he had 5 for 48 yards at 9.6. Okay.
Wow.
So that is just huge, and we talked about it afterwards. I remember going, where does that come from? He ran. I can't remember if he ran for 2 or 3 huge first downs. So I think that's one of the things the Lions will gear on a little bit more on that, to try to keep pressure him, which is what we've been doing the last couple of weeks, especially with Williams last week and these running quarterbacks. So I think that's one of the things that we're going to have to do. Yeah, they don't have their elite, they're all pro guys. I mean, we can go through on all the guys are injured, and we never talk about injuries, but it's the next man up. And those guys on that San Francisco team that are playing now for the injured guys are trying to prove that they should be back. They want to be back. And again, the giant killer. I remember the Detroit Lions a few years ago. Didn't they go into the last game of the season? Already knew they weren't in the playoffs. And what did they do on the road? They won, because that was something to build on during the offseason. So the 49ers are a caged animal with their back against the wall. We got to worry about them. And Brock Purdy is a good football player. And they have a pretty good tight end over there too, I believe. And I think he comes from some college that some court tight end that plays for us came from Iowa or something like that. But anyways, they got some good football players, and we're going to have to be on the top of our game. And I think we will be.
That's true. And again, you referenced that game with the Packers that James talked about as well, the mentality the Lions have going into this. Yeah, and I love that breakdown on how much Brock Purdy scrambled against the Lions. That was one of the difference makers in that game. James, what are your thoughts on the San Francisco offense coming into this game? And if I'm not mistaken, Brock Purdy has like 1 more year left on his contract, I think. So they're getting close to having to make a decision on him. I mean, there are a lot of motivated people on that football team. And so, yeah, like you said, Shanahan's in it to win it. They got pride on the line, and they want to finish the season well the way the Lions did a few years ago, even though it's not a complete similar parallel. But there's a lot of motivation. There's a lot of things to play for. It's not like they're a 2-12 team and everything's gone and they fired the coach and there's an interim there or something like that. So what are you expecting out of this 49er offense, James?
Well, they've been able to run the ball pretty well most of the season, even with using so many different running backs. I mean, Guerrero is a fourth or fifth running back I think that they've used this season. I mean, the last couple of weeks they've been having to use a guy that was a practice squad player for years from the Packers. That's how desperate they were at running back. I think Guerrero is the fourth guy because after you had CMC, then you had Elijah Mitchell, and then Mason, who played so well when McCaffrey was out. He got hurt too and is out for the season. But even so, just rotating running backs in there and hardly ever having any consistency. They've been running the ball pretty well this season. Um, their pass protection, isn't the greatest in the world, especially with Trent Williams out now. So that's going to hurt them at left tackle. But George Kittle, like Coach said, is the best tight end in the NFL right now, and I don't know that that's even. I don't know that you would find many people who would disagree with that. I mean, just between receiving and blocking, he does both, and both at an elite level. And they have pretty good threats at wide receiver. I mean, Deebo Samuel, you get him the ball in open space, he can really hurt you. They got Pearsall, the young first round pick, who's come back from that gunshot wound in the beginning of the season. I think it was preseason-ish. And then Juwan Jennings has kind of been the guy who has really emerged in this offense in the absence of Brandon Ayuk.
Yeah, and Kittle, the tight end there, he's probably going to be a key guy. So, Coach, how's the Lions defense try to stop Kittle and respond to this 49er offense?
Well, I'm going to piggyback off of what James said about the rushing thing. So here's a couple things that the Niners have. The Niners are number 7 rushing the ball with a light box. Okay. And what we're talking about, the light box where they outman us, and our defense is number 29. Now let's go back to last week, and we even talked about it after the post-game show. It was nice to see the Lions in their base defense a little bit more with 3 linebackers. Okay,
Yeah.
so again, the Niners are 7th, Lions are 29th in the light box. So if that 4-3, that may be something they'd already started to work on for this week, knowing that they're going to have to stop that inside run. So then another thing the Niners have on against, they have the numbers, excuse me, rushing inside the tackles. Okay, we're not talking like box, we're just talking rushing inside the tackles. The 49ers are number 6th in the league. The Detroit Lions are number 24th. Okay, the defense. So those two, 7-29 and 6-24, definitely gives the numbers to the Niners. And so I think with getting some of those linebackers back, being able to set up into that 4-3, into our base 4-3 concept, maybe we can get them into that passing game so that we can double the Kittles. We can keep Deebo off the mark. We can man up and concept a little bit. So, that's going to be one of the biggest things if you take those, those two things, piggyback off James said, and then that will, we want Kittle blocking. We don't want Kittle running out for passes. And we want Deebo upset because he's not getting the ball, because we saw a couple weeks ago when he complained about getting the ball, he dropped a touchdown pass. Did I say that? Okay, anyways. So that should all piggyback off the stuff. So that's something that we have to work on.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I love breaking down those numbers by you about them running between the tackles, because that's pretty impressive to be able to do that well. And again, that might change the scheme of the Lions defense to do more of that base defense you're talking about versus running the nickel, which means you might see Branch over at safety instead of in the nickel spot if you're going to run a third linebacker out there. James, the Lions might employ the same defensive positions as they did last week, but I love how Coach talked about this. That 4-3 might have been not just for last week, but preparing for this week, always thinking ahead. What are you thinking you might see out of the Lions defense?
Yeah, you've seen the Lions defense. I mean, one of the first things that Aaron Glenn wants to do is stop the run. So this is a game plan, I think, that kind of plays into what the Lions want to do. Obviously, the personnel for the Lions is not the same as what they wanted it to be at the beginning of the season. But, the Lions love playing against teams that want to run the ball because that's what the Lions want to stop. And if they can do that, they've got the big defensive ends back in Levi and Pascal. They've got their big defensive tackle, healthy and Reader, to be able to stop the run. And obviously losing McNeil is a big injury, literally and figuratively, for this defense. But, maybe this is the week you see Broderick Martin get some snaps. If they're going to run the ball this much and run it in between the tackles, that's his thing. So you might see him a little bit more. But we've also seen Pat O'Connor play pretty well in stretches on the defensive line. So he's another guy that I think you'll see rotated in there a decent amount. If they're gonna pound the ball, you're gonna see Aaron Glenn rotate the defensive line so that they don't get tired out during this game.
That makes a lot of sense. And some of those guys the Lions grabbed in the last couple of weeks have a little bit more time in the system. They're going to be able to react a little bit more versus having to overthink things. And again, getting some guys healthy back on that defensive line just for another week should help out. Now, I think every Lions fan, that you just said it, James, right? This is not the defense Aaron Glenn thought he would have at this point. And so I did a little looking. I looked at some Lions defensive stats right now, and I compared them to where we ended at the end of last year, you guys. And I think they tell a little bit of a story here, and hopefully they give a little bit of optimism to Lions fans out there about what we can still do yet. And I want to hear both of you guys weigh in on this. And so, I know you guys have them in the rundown, but I'm going to put them out there for the listeners. Right now, the Lions defense is 18th in total yards. Last year, we finished 23rd in total yards. So a little bit better, right? Nothing crazy, a little bit. Passing yards allowed, we are 27th. And last year, we finished 27th. Probably not a huge shock that we're kind of in that similar category, 5th from the bottom. Rushing yards, we are 4th in rushing yards allowed. And last year, we finished 2nd. So again, same ballpark. But here's the big difference maker. Right now, the Lions defense is 7th in points allowed. And last year, they finished 23rd in points allowed. And from my perspective, that's because we are not allowing the explosives. We're not getting beat over top. And you want to get the ball at the 15-yard line on us? Okay, but it's going to be a little bit harder for you to throw that touchdown pass against us this year than last year because our secondary is better. You can say, well, the 27th in passing yards allowed. I think it's the approach we take to this. Yeah, Terry and Arnold got beat on a play, but they already talked about that against the Bears and how he misread something and he had studied some film and he was going for an interception. Terry and Arnold's playing really good football for a rookie. And so, once I looked at these numbers, Coach, I'm going to start with you. It made me a lot more optimistic because we got to the NFC Championship game last year with a defense that was 23rd in points allowed. And by the way, we haven't even talked about the offense yet, which seems to be breaking every record from last year. So, do you got some pep talks for anyone listening and concerned about our defense right now?
Bend, don't break. Scoring defense, red zone defense, third down defense. We can give up. You can give up 700 yards in passing. If they don't score, you can't lose. And I think that's the biggest thing that's the pep talk in that situation. Aaron Glenn has adjusted on every week with every injury and with guys that we've lost. And I think that's the thing you have to look at. If we're not giving up the points, like what did Dan Campbell say last week? If I win by 1 point and we only have 50 yards or win by 1 point and we give up 700 yards, I'm going to have a smile from ear to ear. And that's the thing you have to look at. Long as we outscore everybody right now until we get into it, when you get into the playoffs and finish in these big games like that, these are going to become shootouts. You hate to say it, but they are going to become. And I think that's the pep talk. Here, I'm going to throw something real quick. I got one other one that I just love. This is since Aiden Hutchinson, guys. Okay. We are on first down. We are 4th in the league at blitzing 39.5% of the time. Okay. On second down, we are 1st at blitzing at 39%. On third down, okay, we are 46.2% blitzing and that's 2nd in the league in that span since we've lost Hutch. Okay, that's a huge thing. He's bringing pressure nonstop. Okay, and so that's the thing is once we start getting some of these home, now the sacks are awesome, but if you pressure a guy and he throws off his back foot and it's incomplete, or he throws an interception, or he throws it short of the first down, that's a win. Okay, take those as wins. Yeah, we would like to say we got the best sack team in, but in strip sacks and stuff like that, those are the huge, gigantic splash plays. But the small part is we're getting the things done in the situations when we need to. And so this a little for you guys tonight for this game. The 49ers have allowed pressures on 50.3% of blitzes faced. That's the 5th highest rate. Do you think AG's bringing the juice this week? If he's going to have a big game, boys.
I love those stats on what AG's been doing with the defense to get pressure because you lost Marcus Davenport and Aiden Hutchinson, right? The two guys who at the beginning of the season you thought were going to be two of those guys. Aleem McNeil is not in there now. But James, even with all these injuries, and it seems everybody's writing the Lions off. I mean, these defensive stats have to just give you that much encouragement, also knowing how good our offense is this year once again.
Yeah, I think the big difference, I think you in the scoring defense from last year, is like Jerry alluded to this too. Red zone defense, the Lions are seventh in the league at 50%, at only allowing a touchdown at 50% in the red zone. So that's seventh in the league. The best is 44%. But they're number one in the league in third down defense. They still are number one in the league in third down defense. Opposing teams are converting on third down 31.7% of the time, which is obviously is number one. But I mean, you've got the Panthers, they're the worst at almost 48%.
Wow.
The next best team behind the Lions is the Vikings, who are 2% behind Detroit. And then you've got a couple of teams the Dolphins and Steelers, Cowboys, Eagles right behind them, and Packers, another team in the division. So you've got a bunch of teams in the NFC North that are among the best in the league at getting you off the field on third down.
Yeah, and that's why those three teams in the NFC North might be three of the best four teams in the NFC. It's that crazy. And yeah, well, let's jump over to the other side of the ball then. That's where it leads us. What do we expect out of the Lions offense going up against the San Francisco 49er defense? San Francisco is in pretty good shape on defense right now. They are second in total yards given up, third against the pass, 15th against the run, and they're 21st in points allowed. So they've got, they're below the halfway point in points allowed, but those other numbers are not too bad. So James, let's start with you. What are you expecting out of the Lions offense going up against this 49er defense?
Similarly, they got to convert on third down. And the Lions have been doing that at a very good rate this season. Their offense is 46.7%. The only teams in the league that are better than them in that category are the Chiefs, Bucks, Ravens, and Bengals. All teams with pretty good offenses. And that going back to the defense thing, if your offense stays on the field, that's the best defense. Best defense is keeping your defense off the field. So, and the Lions have been doing a much better job at that. I mean, the offense last year was tremendous, and it's been even better this year. So that helps the defense out as well.
Yeah, and Coach, I brought up that San Francisco's third against the pass, but they are going up against Jared Goff. And I know you're a big Goff fan, so I got some amazing stats here for you about Jared Goff before you tell me how we're going to get this job done. Jared Goff is second in the NFL in passing, behind only Joe Burrow. Kind of surprised me. He's second in completion percentage, behind only Tua Tagovailoa, which I guess the number one surprised me there. I didn't realize that. And he's second in the NFL in rating, behind only Lamar Jackson, which also was somewhat surprising. And he's fourth in touchdown passes. So he might not be the MVP of the NFL, but you shouldn't dismiss him from being in the conversation. We'll see what happens. We still got 2 more weeks and anything can happen. But Jared Goff is just having a fantastic season, Coach. And so you should not underestimate what he's capable of doing against the San Francisco 49ers.
Jared Goff is so consistent that he's our quarterback, and I'm glad. I wouldn't take any of the other guys. We have 2 losses because of Jared Goff. Not saying only 2 losses is what I want to say. And we have not lost a big game here, a big game there. The guy, again, we go back through his 5 picks, comes back and tears it up the following week. We still win. He's the true leader on our team. We got the best record, one of the best records in football, of course. And it's because of him. And, the stat numbers, yeah, he gets pushed out because he doesn't have the flash numbers, or he doesn't run around and dodge 3 guys and do this. But I'd take him. We'll keep him in our system. And there's no way to get it. And as far as we're concerned, he's our MVP. And you know what? There's only one MVP he cares about. Okay. And that's on Super Bowl Sunday, boys. And that's the one he's after.
And so how do you think Goff and the Lions passing attack is going to go against the 49ers. Obviously, we think it's probably going to have to do with the rushing attack, right? Because we love to play action. Jahmyr Gibbs is 7th in rushing right now. I think he was 4th before, but he's averaging 5.5 yards a carry still. And here's a couple of stats that should get people super excited about Gibbs. There's only 2 running backs in the top 15 that have a better rush per average than him. Only 2. And there's only 1 in the top 15 that has fewer carries than him. And so we know the rushing game sets up the passing game for the Lions. Do you expect more of that, Coach?
Oh, for sure. Let's talk about San Francisco, and I'm going to give you guys some numbers that people don't see or hear. First of all, they run 74.3%. They run nickel. We've talked about that week in and week out over the last few weeks, and we know what happens when we got a nickel back. We can run the ball. Lenore goes into the nickel spot. Green goes to the corner spot. Lenore's good football player, but let's talk about, and again, we're a play action pass thing. Okay, so let me throw some numbers at you. Passing versus the blitz. The Detroit Lions offense is number 2. The San Francisco 49ers defense is number 29. Okay.
Wow.
The short pass game. The Lions offense is number 1. The 49ers defense is number 22. The passing versus play action, which is the film that I put together. We are number 1 with our play action passing. The 49ers defense is number 20. Okay. Rushing versus a light box. Okay. And I consider a light box with a nickel back. The Lions are number 4 versus that light box. The 49ers are number 25.
Those are a lot of situations, Coach, where the Lions can take advantage based on their strength and the 49ers' weakness.
Yep. And the final one, which we really like, rushing in the red zone, the Lions are number 8. The 49ers are number 29.
Wow, that's a big one.
So our offense runs right into what the Niners are lacking on their defense. Again, it's a huge game. Turnovers, things like that can make the change. But if you're a statistic guy or you're a stat guy or you're analytic guy, I like our analytics.
Yeah, I do too. The Lions, they're 2nd in total yards, 2nd in passing, 6th in rushing per game, and they are number 1 in points scored. James, what are some things you're looking for out of the Lions offense in this one? I mean, Coach just set the plate right there, man. There are a lot of opportunities where the Lions should be able to take advantage.
Yeah. You stay away from Fred Warner and in that defense, and you should be pretty solid. But that's not been easy for teams to do. I mean, Fred Warner seems to be everywhere if you watch 49ers games. It'll be interesting to see how the running back workload goes. I mean, last week, Jahmyr Gibbs had 45 snaps, almost 70% of the time he was on the field. The other 3 running backs that they had, Reynolds, Vaki, and Jefferson, had a total of 20 snaps. So he did over 2/3 of the work there at running back. So it'll be interesting to see if that high of a workload keeps going. But you can, if you're the Lions, you could be looking at it too as saying, okay, well, we give him an increased workload for 2 more weeks, get the number 1 seed, and he gets a week off. And then we get David Montgomery back in the divisional round, which is what the projection is now, is that he'll be ready for the divisional round, which would be the 2nd round of the playoffs. So it'll be interesting to see, though, if they give Reynolds, Vaki, Jefferson a little bit more work in this game. I mean, obviously the way the game flows is going to change that a lot, but I'll be interested to see what they do with those 3 guys, how they use them, if they use them a lot more than last week, if they condense it down to maybe just using a couple of them behind him, and then or just how they go about it. And I think the 49ers got to be wondering that too.
Yeah, I think that's going to be key because I think last week, we talked about against the Bears, they were getting the feet wet on all those guys, right? Get some snaps in there. And I do think it's going to be Craig Reynolds and Jermar Jefferson getting the majority of those backup carry snaps for a couple of reasons. One is their experience, and 2, it might be their size on the inside. We saw Craig Reynolds being trusted in the playoffs last year, right? So that what you have in Craig Reynolds, and Jermar Jefferson's a guy that they've just been excited about since he's been there, and some injuries have just set him back a few times. And so I think you're right, though, James. The game's going to dictate a lot of this, and if they can get a comfortable lead late in the game, you might see, again, where you're going to see even more reliance on the backups, whether it's Reynolds or Jefferson. All right, well, Anything else on the offense, guys, or anything on special teams before we switch over to major storylines? Coach, we'll start with you.
One quick thing on there. The Niners, their defense has allowed the fourth lowest explosive run rates to opposing this team this season, 7.6%. The reason I bring that up, the fourth lowest explosion run rate, is because Gibbs is the number one explosive run rate guy in the NFL. Yeah, last time I checked, it was at like 17% of 10 plus yards. So that
Wow.
Warner guy and those guys are it's going to be interesting. That's kind of a matchup that hopefully we're going to win that one.
Yeah, that's great. I did not realize that Gibbs was that high up there. That's incredible. James, how about you?
Yeah, it would be interesting to see what the Lions do with Bosa. I don't know that the 49ers move him around a whole lot as far as moving him from one end to the other. I think he mostly sticks over top of the right tackle. I mean, and that plays right into the Lions' strength too. If you're going to line him up over Penny Sewell consistently, I think that Sewell can just take one of the best players on your defense out of the game. So it'll be interesting to see if they move him around a little bit more than normal to get him away from Sewell. Because Bosa and Warner are the two players who can really do damage on that defense. They have some pretty good players other than those two, but those two really, really stand out. Mustafa's a pretty good big hitter at safety, but I don't know how great he is so far in coverage, and he's still fairly young too.
All right. Well, let's go to major storylines and the unexpected. First thing is, Coach, you spotted this right away. David Long, linebacker, got claimed off waivers. It made me feel a little bit like the Trevor Nowatzki situation last year where the Lions had some moving parts and maybe wanted him to come back. I don't know the whole story with David Long. Ultimately, he didn't pass his physical, so he has not been claimed on waivers. Coach, start with you. Is it just a numbers thing of them circling or cycling through people to get the right guys in the lineup? And then James, want to hear your thoughts on where this leaves things with David Long.
Yeah, I think Long was one of those guys that they were trying to sneak under the wire and get him in and bring him back to the practice squad because he did some good stuff for us. Plus, you can't be bringing any more linebackers in that don't know the system. And, and at least Long, he's had how many weeks with us? He was like a veteran, wasn't he? And so, yeah, that's bad. It's interesting to see what how he failed his physical. I'm thinking he drank a whole bunch of coffee, so his blood pressure was high, so they couldn't claim him, and now he can come back to the Lions. But I don't know. That's just wishful thinking on my part.
Failing a physical on purpose so you can clear waivers so you have the freedom to go anywhere you want. James, is that how that works? And not the failing on purpose, but now that he's failed it, is he a free agent?
I think that that's the way that it works. Or if other teams put claims on him, maybe they would be awarded that claim if they want to. But I think once he fails a physical, the other teams are going to kind of cancel all those claims. So it could be something like that. I think it could be that maybe he was just dinged up and that's why the Lions let him go. And then they were hoping maybe put him on the practice squad, get him healed up. And they've also got the potential of Jalen Reeves-Maybin coming off injured reserve possibly this week to be able to play too. So, I mean, it could have just been that Jalen Reeves-Maybin was going to take his spot.
Yeah, I do think it was simply a roster of, all right, who do we have in this position? We need so many guys in this spot, so many in that spot. We saw that happen last year with the shuffling. Again, we brought up Trevor Nowatzki's name already, and the Lions were not happy when Arizona claimed him last year. So that's what's going on right now. Coming back from injury, shuffling parts out, wanting to make sure each area of the team has enough depth for each week, and that changes on a weekly basis. Speaking of depth, the Detroit Lions have signed another quarterback. Teddy Bridgewater is back with the Lions. I heard, first off, if you've not been aware, Teddy Bridgewater won the state title in football, coaching high school football. Quite the debut right there. So that's quite an impact right away. But he also mentioned after it, he wanted to get back into the NFL. And I presumed it meant this season yet, with the team on a playoff run. Some people maybe thought next year, but I think he's probably going to coach next year. So Coach Campbell talked about it today. He said he's been in touch with him for a while. He said the veteran presence makes it great for him to be on the team and the position. And it doesn't mean anything bad about Hendon Hooker, so don't read into that. He said Hendon's improved steadily, And Campbell also said, hey, we're about to enter a new era, or not new era, a new season, if you will, a new part of the season. We're getting ready for the playoffs. Everything is about to get different. So, Coach, let me start with you, and then James, what does it mean with the Teddy Bridgewater signing? And how much do you like it?
That's huge. I mean, I here's the thing is, and again, I don't want to say huge. That's a hard one, but you're bringing back a guy who was just. I think everybody was sad that he left, and I'm not. And Hendon Hooker was one of them. Okay, which he's going to teach him. Oh, he's still, he's got that's that extra coach out there to be out there. That's the guy that can run scout team. Now we got two different. We got a running quarterback in Hendon Hooker if he's going to run scout team, and then of course you're not banging him. And then we got Teddy on the same concept. So that it's going to help with practice. I know there's one person on that team for sure that is extremely excited that he's here, and it's JMO. And because he did so much for JMO, I just read a thing JMO sent out right away about everything that he did for him, and that's just that's just great coaching. Bring back veteran guys, put them on the practice squad, guys that can help you, and a guy that if something happens, you can throw him in there. And because he's going to do the job. So I like it from that standpoint of looking at the big picture and how much he can help the team, not just behind the center, but in the locker room and in the streets and in the meetings and everything else. So I'm excited for Teddy, and congrats on the state championship. Maybe I could have got a job with the Lions if I'd have won a state championship and not finished twice or second twice. Well, who knows?
Yeah, well, as Dan Campbell said, nobody writes our story. Coach, your story is out there. It's not done, okay? Maybe that's the next chapter for you.
Yes.
James, what are you thinking about this Teddy Bridgewater thing?
It's going to be a great story. I tell you that. I mean,
which one, the Teddy Bridgewater story or the coach story?
Well, they both can be, but Bridgewater for sure. I mean, retiring from the NFL, going back to your alma mater, even in high school, leading them to a state championship in your first year, and then unretiring and signing with a Super Bowl contender, with a chance to get a ring there. I think you're gonna see if the Lions start making a run in the playoffs that teams are the networks are gonna start doing little features on Teddy Bridgewater, or the media will be, just because that's a pretty interesting story there to make that move there for Teddy Two Gloves.
Yeah, I love this move. And Coach, you said it's huge. I think it actually is huge, and it's for so many different reasons. The first is you talked about what he did for JMO, right? So he's back. He can work more with those other receivers to just give them continued practice. Remember when the Lions kept some other guys on the roster as a quarterback who might not have been that talented in a game, but they were able to help get Jared Goff ready for the game with film review and stuff? Hendon Hooker doesn't have the game experience that Teddy Bridgewater has. So Teddy brings that to the quarterback's room, as well as being able to help with the receiving room. And so you got a coach and a player right there. So that is really big. And, it's going to help Hendon Hooker as well. The other thing is, and somebody asked Coach Campbell about this, is, well, what if an injury occurs? Now, I mean, anybody that wanted Daniel Jones as an insurance policy, this is even better than that, because this guy knows our system. He's a professional. He has this positive influence on the locker room. And, oh, by the way, now Hendon Hooker's your third string quarterback. If there's an emergency situation, the Lions just added huge depth at arguably the most critical position of the football team. And so this was a win-win-win. It was win for the Lions team. It was win for Teddy Bridgewater. It was a win for all Lions fans. And I don't know who that fourth win was for, but it's such a good win. I'm just adding one on. So
players.
The who?
The players.
The players. Yeah, exactly. So it was great. And JMO. Yeah. So it's awesome. All right. Well, we already mentioned, James, you brought up Jalen Reeves-Maybin might have a chance to play this week. They started the window on Khalif Raymond. They're not expecting him back this week, but they could get some more reinforcements on defense with that. James, what are you thinking on these moves or any other potential moves coming up soon?
Yeah, it sounds like there's a pretty decent chance that Reese Maben can play this week. They started his clock over a week ago, so he's gotten in some good practices. I would expect Raymond maybe to be the last game against the Vikings. So that would, interestingly enough, if he came back for the Vikings, it'd be the last week of the season against the Vikings, which is where he got hurt last year,
Oh,
and then missed the playoffs. But his presence on special teams gives them so much, and it gives them one more reliable set of hands at wide receiver too. Um, Once he comes back, I would kind of think that maybe Allen Robinson goes back to the practice squad, to make that roster spot to activate Raymond, but maybe not. You're never sure how they're going to move things around, especially if somebody else gets dinged up.
yeah, and that's tricky this time of year because if you waive anybody, they go through waivers at this point. There's not that veteran thing that prevents it. So somebody could grab Allen Robinson off of that. This is where things get really tricky these next couple weeks. Coach Jalen Reese-Maben. I mean, he's a big special teamer, but he also plays linebacker. So that's an encouraging sign that he's getting close.
Oh, for sure. I think he's our second best cover guy. Campbell's probably up there right now, but now we can leave Campbell in the box and take care of Anzalone until Anzalone comes back. Then things just open up, boys. 4-3 defense. There we go. Okay. Just like the 12 personnel on offense, get the dogs back in there. So yeah, I think that's a huge, huge thing for us because Maben just does so much for us. I mean, he was, all pro last year, special teams guy, but just one of those phenomenal leader guys that comes back out and does everything you ask and a high level too. So that would be a huge addition.
That it would. All right. Well, let's touch on a couple things real quick about week 17 and potentially week 18 before we wrap this thing up. The Vikings are playing on Sunday at 4:00. The Lions are on Monday Night Football. We know Coach Campbell already said no matter what happens with the Vikings against the Packers, the Lions are going to play to win that game. If the Lions and Vikings both win, you guys, that would put them both at 14 wins. And that means a wild card team would have 14 wins. That has never happened before. The 1999 Tennessee Titans were 13-3. They were a wild card team. And then if I got my information right on that, that's what I looked up, but slightly confused on that one. And the Ravens apparently in 2000 were 12-4. And so we'll see what happens this week. But the NFC North is going to. They're going to have 3 playoff teams, very likely. I did see something on social media where somebody, I must have been a Packers fan, and they said, we'll beat the Vikings this week as long as you promise to beat them next week, because I think that would move them up in the seeding or something like that. But, James, pretty dominant NFC North right now, and it'll be real interesting to see what happens in these next few days going into week 18.
Yeah, I think all 3 of them are locks already to get in the playoffs. I think the Packers.
Yeah, you're right. The Packers are a lock.
Clinched with their last win, the game against New Orleans. But yeah, between those 3, they're 37-8, and 4 of those 8 losses are against each other. So outside of the division, those 4 teams are 37-4. That is amazing to have concentrated in one division.
Yeah. And you know what? 2 of those teams are going on the road in the first week of the playoffs, likely to play the AFC South and the AFC West teams. And then likely Washington going to the number 2 seed Philly, because I think those are pretty much locked up as well. Again, there's potential for some things to change right there. Anything you want to mention about that, James, real quick before we look at the TV schedule?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, if the Lions do lose to San Fran, they would potentially allow the Eagles to catch them. And I mean, the Eagles have 2 easy games the last 2 weeks of the season. I would expect them to go 2-0, even if they sit Jalen Hurts because of that concussion that he got last week. I think the other thing, I think it was Jeremy Reisman who pointed this out, and I was lamenting this when when we were talking in our text chat about that he had one of my things that I was going to saving for the pod, which is if they beat the 49ers, the thing that gives as an advantage more than just the win too is playing the Vikings at the end of the game. It would give the strategy of a tie as a win for the Lions in that game. They would still win the division and they would still win the number 1 seed with a tie in that game against the Vikings.
Oh, you mean even if the Vikings win this week as well, the Lions, a win or a tie gives them the division. They don't just no loss. So they get the advantage of a tie.
Yeah, if the Vikings win and the Lions beat San Fran, then in week 18, the last week of the season against the Vikings, the Lions can play for the tie and essentially win that game,
Gotcha.
win the division, win the number 1 seed. So
All
it could
right.
change
Well,
maybe decisions at the end of the game.
that it could, yes. All right. Well, we're hoping it doesn't come to that. I personally, for very selfish reasons, hey, coach, you want to say something?
I'm here for it. I don't want to interrupt on that, but I'm going to beg to differ with James, even though I believe in everything he says, but I got to go with my boy Cooper Rush. I'm sorry. I don't think the Eagles have an easy game against the Dallas Cowboys. Let me throw a stat at you, boys. You know I'm a stat guy. Okay. Cooper Rush has 13 starts. Cooper Rush has beat Joe Burrow, Jaden Daniels, Baker Mayfield, and Bryce Young in those 13 starts. Nobody in the NFL has ever done that. And in 14 starts, he is going to add Jalen Hurts to that list, guys. I'm just saying, I
Well,
got to go with my boy Coop.
I don't blame you for doing that because one thing I almost was going to say, but I did forget to as well is, I think Tampa may have slept on those Cowboys and they lost 26-24. And so I think it'll be a close game. I don't know who's going to win that one, but Tampa is going to have to show up if is it Tampa that's playing them next? I'm sorry, Tampa didn't show up fully. So they're at Philly. It's a division game. Personally, though, selfish reasons, guys, I do not want the Lions-Vikings games flexed to 8 p.m. on Sunday night. I'm like 99% sure that's what's going to happen because everything the last 3 weeks has been pushing us down that road. But I want to go to that game, but I don't want to, have to drive all the way back that night and go to work the next morning. So I would love a 425 game. I would also like the division wrapped up and done by Monday Night Football after the Lions play the 49ers so that we know what's going in. But James, there were a few games that you looked at that might be possible. The Rams in Seattle, I think, is the one I've been thinking about. That's probably the top one, but you kind of broke down and looked at a few, kind of mentioned those out to people. What are the possibilities?
Yeah, because I don't think the Lions will get flexed to Saturday because they're playing on Monday night.
I agree.
Hopefully, the NFL wouldn't be that big of a jerk and make the team in a playoff run have to play on that shorter rest. So I would think that if they're going to get flexed, it's going to be to Sunday. So yeah, the Seattle Rams game could be a play-in game. In the final week of the season, you've got Cincinnati at Pittsburgh. The Steelers are still playing for the 3 seed. Cincy could still get in if they beat the Broncos and then the Steelers, and maybe some other stuff happens. Chiefs at Broncos is another one. The Broncos, as of right now, are still in the hunt for the wild card, but the Chiefs obviously have nothing to play for in that game. They've already locked up the number 1 seed. And then you've got Chicago at Green Bay. If Green Bay wins twice and Minnesota loses twice, Green Bay can catch them in the standings. I don't know how their tiebreakers go and who would win the tiebreakers and stuff, but Green Bay could catch them in the win-loss column. And then you've got Washington at Dallas. That's likely also less likely to be a Saturday game since they played Sunday night this week. But Washington is a playoff team as well. But they're fairly well locked in, I think, to the 7 seed, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. I think the Seattle Rams game or the Cincinnati Pittsburgh game are the only two that are a realistic challenge to be flexed to Sunday night. Based on what they might have. But with Seattle losing to the Vikings, that hurts their chances of winning the division. And so it might be the Cincy-Pittsburgh game. I'm just hoping that, it's not the Lions, but odds are it will be. And if it is, I'll be there. We'll figure it all out. All right, James, let's get that ref report.
We get the Sean Hockey crew again, the same crew that they had for the Colts game on the road. They had their statistics kind of haven't changed a whole lot since then as far as what they call and how often they call it. They call a lot of false starts, a lot of offensive holding, but not a lot of defensive pass interference or defensive holding. And their calls are pretty evenly split between home and away teams, which is not necessarily a common thing with officiating crews who tend to call a few more penalties on the away team than the home team.
All right. Well, I have a stat that I want one of you guys to deep dive into if you feel like it. One of you mentioned that Jared Goff has like the fewest he's been the beneficiary of the fewest number of defensive pass interference calls when he's throwing the football. I would love to know how many yards each quarterback has been allowed or allotted, or their team has been given for those things, and see how much further other teams have been able to move down the field with that, where Jared Goff has not been able to benefit from that. James? Yeah, I'm not expecting these numbers now, but I know you wanted to raise. You had something you wanted to say.
Yeah. No, I was just putting my one finger up because he's gotten one call.
There you go.
One defensive holding call is all they've gotten this year. One for, and I believe it was only for like 7 yards.
All right. Well, moving on from the penalties, it'll be interesting to see if we come up with that stat for the next show or two. But what's it going to take for the Lions to win this game, Coach? I'll start with you.
Well, I guess, we go into the same thing. We want to get Brock Purdy into a situation to where, he's one dimensional, and we're going to have to hold him in the box. We got to keep him in the box. He cannot run for big. He cannot run for big first downs to prolonged drives, and that's kind of what happened to us in the second half last time we played them. And I think the turnover battle again. We're going to talk about the run defense, stuff like that, but we had critical turnovers in that game and critical situations. We were totally dominating them. And then all of a sudden you see how quick it turns. And I think that's the big thing. And so I'll throw a new one. I've used it. It's called sudden change. And we can't have, and if we have sudden change, negatively, with the turnover, something like that, we got to step up defensively. And if we get a turnover from them, we have to exploit them immediately on sudden change and put doubt. And so those are big key things. And I'm sure Campbell and them are talking about those things and not allowing it to snowball, steamroll, and get out of control, which this team doesn't do that.
Okay, I got those numbers for you.
Oh, wait, you got those numbers already? Coach, I like what you said before James gets to those numbers.
Yeah.
You're exactly right. And you know what? I think, again, that's one of those many lessons they learned from last year's NFC Championship game, and they have now the experience and the fortitude to respond to that. So I love that. James, before we hear what you want to say about what it's going to take for the Lions to win, tell us about those numbers.
Yeah, the Lions, have only been the beneficiary of one defensive pass interference call for 5 yards this season, which is no other team has fewer than 4. The most is 16 by the Rams, and Seattle 15, Cincinnati 15, a bunch of teams, in double digits.
Do they happen to put the yards with them for how many yards they've gained based on those penalties?
Yeah, 240 for the Rams on 16 calls, 201 for Seattle on 15 calls. And like I said, the Lions 1 for 5. The Lions are also the second most penalized in defensive pass interference, with 17. Actually, they're tied. They're tied with the Jets for the most in the league with 17.
So maybe the people who keep saying the Lions are getting all these favorable calls should realize the numbers don't lie or something. I don't know. But nice work on getting that so quickly. So, all right, great work by our offense. James, what's it going to take for Lions to win this game?
Like I said, they got to keep away from San Francisco's best players. They got Warner and Bosa on defense, Kittle on offense. I think Kittle's the one that can, we've seen the last few games with the Lions linebacking core being pieced together, that tight ends have really been getting them. So I think they really need to pay attention to Kittle in this game.
Okay. Well, I'm going to say they got to get the running game going. That's going to be crucial in this one. And they got to limit explosives. That's what the two things I think it's going to take. Campbell did talk about the fact that they haven't been getting a lot of turnovers as much as they did earlier, and they got 2 last week. So that was nice. Even though they weren't interceptions, they were fumbles, and the Lions didn't give the ball over. So that was nice, and that goes to what Coach talked about. So if something does go wrong, how do they react? So prediction time, which is similar but different, I'm going to say the Lions are going to pay very close attention to detail. And if they get up, they're not taking the foot off the accelerator in this game. I honestly think they are looking at this game the way they looked at the Dallas Cowboy game earlier this year, you guys. And I think they want the exact same result as that Cowboy game. I'm going to predict a Detroit Lion running back other than Jahmyr Gibbs will get a touchdown in this game. And I'm going to predict the Detroit Lions will come up with an interception in this game. Coach, what predictions you got for this one?
Well, I think the same thing, but I'm gonna go with Laporta because of the short passing game and the play action pass. He had a huge first half against them last year. The Niners are gearing up towards it to defend against it, and I think the Lions may use Laporta as a decoy. And Brock Wright's going to make the catches, or they're just going to let the dog eat, and they're going to feed Laporta.
All right. Like it. James, give us your final thoughts on predictions.
I'll say Zadarius Smith gets a sack, and part of that is multiple reasons. One, Trent Williams is out. He's their left tackle, so he's out. That's where Smith usually lines up, is over the left tackle. Also, if he gets 2 more sacks, he gets a $250,000 bonus. If he gets 4 more sacks, he gets another $250,000 bonus. And if he meets either of those, he gets another 250 on top of that. So 2 sacks, if he gets 2 sacks in these last 2 games, it equals $500,000 for him.
Wow. That's nice. Kind of like the Josh Reynolds thing last year for getting some catches and stuff. So, All right. Well, we're rooting for Zadarius Smith to get a little bit more. All right. And hopefully that comes with a Lions victory. Even if it's only by 1 point, we just want the W. 1-0, right, Coach?
Yes, sir. Love it. 1-0.
All right. On that note, thank you, folks, so much for tuning in. You can find more episodes and content at notthesameoldlions.com. Tell your friends and family about the show. Like, comment on socials. Please subscribe regardless of your listening platform. And until next time, stay gritty, my friends.